Hey everybody, welcome back to Caveman Security. So today we're going to go through a new topic. We're going to go through the OWASP top 10, but we're going to go through the Bola, which is broken object level access. So this is really important because we're going to learn about what it is, how we can abuse it, and hopefully how to prevent it. So if you guys are ready, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so let's go through this. So let's go through the OWASP top 10. We're going to go through Bola. So let's talk about it. What is authorization? You know, I think this is really important. This actually gets overlooked a lot in cybersecurity. We need to kind of know the difference between authentication and authorization. So let's look at authentication as we're going to go buy a beer, right? So we need to be 21. So when we do that, we need to give our ID to show, hey, I'm 21, right? So this is authenticating. Who are you? Are you, is this you, right? Authorization. What are you allowed to access? So kind of the same thing. You know, am I allowed to be in the bar? Am I allowed to go here? So again, when they check your ID, they're checking, okay, hey, this is actually who he's, he's old enough to be here, he's allowed. So I think this is a really crude example, but I think it's a really clear example because, yes, we need to make sure that, whoever is accessing information is who they say they are. And depending on their role and their usage, if they're getting the correct information. So really, really important, especially when we look at APIs, because a lot of times this can be used and abused pretty badly. Okay. So let's talk about it. What is an object? So objects are usually resources. So these could be like user profiles, vehicles, orders, invoices, medical records. So this is really important because when we look at these different objects, we can see that they play a role in what we can observe, what we can use, and it could be dangerous, especially if these authorizations, authentication checks, they're broken. They're not being well maintained, right? So if we're able to access this information, we're going to run into a lot of trouble. Okay, so let's look at the core problem. So API trusts user input. It doesn't matter who you are. So user can change from API to user to 1001 to API user 1002. And that's true, anyone can do this, right? So you can look at your URL, you can go to Postman, Kaido, and you can say, oh, I'm going to change this. Now, depending if the authorization check is good or not, you have a high chance that you could probably navigate to this information. And that's really sad because they should have this in place, But yes, so obviously the API will automatically say, okay, person's changing from 001 to 002, no problem. So we have to be really, really careful about how we can secure these endpoints and make sure these APIs are secure. Okay, so why does Bola happen? So a lot of times it's because it's missing ownership checks. So meaning like is it checking for like JWT tokens, cookies, whatever, what's actually happening behind the scenes, so if we're saying, is this your object, right? Is this like your vehicle ID? Is this your medical record? Whatever it could be. And should you access this, right? So a lot of times when we have broken access control, or broken object level access, sometimes we could access someone else's information, which is very detrimental to not just us, but to the other user, right? So when we don't have these in place, this is what happens. All right, so here's some common patterns, and this is something you can look out for as like a bug bounty hunter, as a regular person, whatever. So we see some dangerous patterns. So we see user 1001, order 5001, invoice 9001. So as long as we see these numbers here at the end, we can play with these. You can sit there and you can do some fuzzing, you can do some brute forcing, and see if you can access any other information. Now, a lot of people will say, well, Robbie, there's no guarantee that there's a 1001 after that. How do we know there's a 1002? Well, you don't. And that's where, as ethical hackers or bug bounty hunters, we're going to test that, either by doing fuzzing, by doing brute forcing, whatever. So a lot of times people think that they're safe with these complicated numbers, but reality is no, this is a really, really simple number. Now, if it has some sort of hashed algorithm or something, maybe. But as long as you can find a pattern and it's easily changeable, we're in trouble, okay? All right, so let's talk about what is IDOR versus Bola. So I think this is really, really important because these are very similar ideas, but they are vastly different. So IDOR focuses on forms and URL parameters, but it's a very broad term. So it's kind of talking about the whole web application. Okay, so it's not particularly any one thing. But Bola is focused on the API. So this is going to be directly through API testing. And they focus on the requests, the payloads, the headers. So when you think about it, think about IDOR as like a broader term for the overall web application, what you can access, what you can't. Bola is really focused on API. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Okay, so how can we prevent Bola? So this comes down to verify ownership. So before we return data, we should verify object ownership, import the authorization checks. So this could be something like JWT tokens. I think that's probably one of the more secure options, or we can check out cookie access, stuff like this. So a lot of times when we're building like our account, right, usually there should be some sort of cookie creation, some sort of JWT creation. So whatever we create, like an object, let's say we create a medical record, we create an account, whatever, usually it is connected to that JWT token. So when we try to look at someone else's profile, what it should do is it should say, okay, let's run this JWT token against 1002. And if we see that this is only good for 1001, it should come back as negative or not show up at all, right? But if the access is broken, then yeah, we could probably access it, right? So that's why it's really, really important when you're developing these API endpoints, these different things, to include JWT or cookies, so then we are able to kind of worry about ownership a little bit better. Things are more secure, and it's not so hard. Now, in later videos, I will go over how we could actually manipulate these tokens to actually gain access. But for the purpose of this video, this is what we should be doing to kind of secure these endpoints, okay? So here's just kind of a secure example. I'm not going to say it's a completely perfect example, but this will kind of give you an idea of what we should look at. So here's a quick code snippet. So we have an if statement. So we should say if the vehicle.ownerID does not equal current user.id, then return 403. Okay, so this is a very crude example, but this is very clear, right? Because we're looking at two things. We're doing vehicle.theOwnerID. So the meaning that whatever my object is, which is the vehicle, and then my owner ID, should match the current user, which means I'm the logged in user, plus my ID, right? So if those things match, then I should have access to that information. But if they don't match, then I will not have access. Okay, so this is really, really important, and I think this is something that should be implemented more. So we're taking it a step further, right? So we're doing these authentication checks here, plus we're doing like maybe checks with like JWT and cookies, right? So the more layers in depth we have, the more secure we can potentially make our endpoints, our web applications, our APIs, stuff like this. Okay, so key takeaways. So Bola happens when APIs trust object IDs, they skip ownership checks, they expose unauthorized data. So this is really, really important. So obviously, APIs, they're designed to be a convenience, and because of that convenience, comes with risk, right? So we have to now take it a step further and say, hey, you know what? Do I have these checks in place? Do I have authorization in place? Do I have JWT in place? And when we look at these different things, we need to go down that checklist because we don't want people to have too much access to information. Because the reality is, if someone knows how to manipulate API, they're going to. So I think when we look at developers, they sit there and say, oh, I don't have to worry about it too much. People are not that smart. Reality is, people are that smart. They can figure it out. And now with AI, they can definitely figure it out. So I think as developers, we have to kind of go back and say, okay, am I following like the secure lifecycle model correctly? Am I implementing correct security controls? Am I putting in input sanitization correctly? So now for developers, this role is more crucial than ever because security is becoming a much bigger part in that development lifecycle. Okay. All right, guys. So now let's do a real-world example. We're going to go ahead and use crappy API again. And this time we're going to look at how to access mechanic reports for other users. So give me a second and let's go ahead and work on that. All right, so here we are back on our dashboard. So what we want to do now that we've already added our vehicle and stuff like this. What we want to do is we actually want to look at this mechanic, contact mechanic form. So let's kind of look at this. So we're going to fill out a request form and kind of see what it does. So we're going to choose our vehicle, or our mechanic, sorry. I'm going to choose, I guess, John. And I'm going to say, there is no oil in my car. Okay, so just silly message, but we're going to go ahead and send this report. So one thing about these forms is they automatically will kind of give us some telling information. So let's go ahead and take a look at Kaido here, and let's kind of look at our current setup. So let's see, let's look for our workshop API. Let's see if we got that. So, nope, not quite. So we're going to go up. All right, so here we are. So I believe this is our form that we filled out. Yep. So we're almost to the information that we want. So let's see if we can kind of keep going, see if we can find it. Okay, let's see. Yep, here's our contact form. Okay, so this is something that's like really, really useful here. So now we see the thing that we did. We went ahead and we picked our mechanic. We told him the problem. We have our VIN number. And actually, this is very interesting. It gives us the mechanic API. So that's kind of weird. So it kind of gives us something about like receive reports. So we could actually probably visit this endpoint and see what's there. But for the purpose of this exercise, we actually want to look at the response. So we actually see here this report link. So if we kind of look at this, we see that this actually has a number 8 at the end. So it says a report ID equals 8. So this can tell us a lot of things. This can tell us that we could potentially hover over someone else's information. We can see what's available, stuff like this. So let's go ahead and actually copy this URL. And we're just going to navigate to it just to kind of activate the endpoint in Kaido. So let's just go ahead and open up another tab. And we're going to take a look. All right, so JWT token required. So that's kind of a good thing. So there is some authorization checks here, but in this case, we can actually bypass this very easily. So what we want to do is we want to look back at Kaido, and we're going to see if we can find this login here. So, okay, so we do see here the workshop, API mechanic, merchant, report ID 8, okay? So what we're going to do, actually, we're going to actually do two things. We need to take this and we're going to put this in automate because I want to see if we can find some information. But we also need to grab our bearer token. So for some reason, when we did this, it didn't actually give us anything. So if we go back to like our original endpoint, we do see, okay, there's the authorization. So what we can do is we can actually just add this inside of our request. You add it anywhere, you know, it doesn't really matter, but as long as it's in there correctly. So what we should be able to do now is we should be able to access this report. But the goal is it's not to access our report, it's to access someone else's report. So what we want to do, just to show it for demonstration purposes, is to see if we can find someone else's. So we're going to do a simple brute forcing. We're going to do a numbers payload. And we're going to do something like 1 through like 20, right? Just to kind of see if there's any other endpoints. So we're going to let this run for a second and see what it can find, okay? So if we find anything, we should get a 200 okay. So if you guys remember from earlier lessons, if we have a status 200, that means that things are going good, right? So let's see if we get anything valuable. All right, so we actually do see a few things. So let's go ahead and filter out our endpoints a little bit. So we do see a couple. So we see 1 through 8, sorry. These all come back 200 okay, right? So remember, if we remember ours, I think ours is like 7, right? So we go back to like our API history. So we can see that ours is number 8, okay? Not number 7, sorry. So we can see that we have 1 through 8. So we know ours is here at the bottom. But so let's kind of look at this. Let's look at number 1. So again, what can we do? Okay, we see this person also has a mechanic named John. Here's John's email. Here's this guy. Here's his VIN number. Here's this guy's email. And this guy's phone number. So this is actually very dangerous because we're automatically seeing PII, which is already like a privacy concern. And it kind of, we can also read the problems, the mechanic details, mechanic complaints, stuff like this. So we can see that this is very, very dangerous because I can sit there and look at user 1, user 2, sorry, report 2, report 3, and you can see all this information. So reality is, is as long as we can have like a access to this information, we know how to access information, Bola is very easy. Okay, so guys, hopefully this was a good example for you guys to see that we can access other people's information and how easy it is. As long as we know how the authorization check works, and if that's broken, then we can look at other people's information. Okay, guys, so thank you guys for watching this episode of the Top 10 on Bola. We'll see you guys in the next episode. Thank you.